Good evening. Welcome to St. Petersburg Community Church, Wednesday night Bible study and live stream. The messages are also recorded, so you can review them later or catch them if you're not able to see the live stream. We've been looking at the character and commands of Christ this is the 11th week now. And we're looking at tonight the command for gratefulness, because we want to experience the character of Christ by experiencing the power of his divine love. Love is the main character, and everything grows out of that. And in the foundation stage of learning his character, we are on the third character quality of gratefulness. So we are to, the command that goes along with that is to render to Caesar that which is due, Matthew chapter 22, verses 20 through 21. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." So we have a dual responsibility, and they're kind of equivalent, not in value, but in exercise and practice. Now, we want to look at a study question, which we're going to learn while we go through this. Maybe not until next week it will be answered. But Jesus condemned the unfaithful steward for not increasing the amount of money entrusted to him. Why then did Jesus entrust money to Judas and not reprove him when he knew Judas was stealing it? You can see the story of Judas in Matthew chapter 25, verses 24 through 27. Now, there was a conflict over taxation. It's kind of interesting sometimes the way that people in biblical times look at issues or concerns that they have, and we need to learn from them about coming back to a biblical basis for what we want or don't want. Jesus gave this command in response to two opposing schools of thought regarding taxation. Those in one group believed that it was legal to pay tribute to Caesar. The other group did not. These two factions exist today among believers, so the command is quite significant for all of us to consider. The Herodians were loyal to the house of Herod. They looked to Rome to restore the independence of the nation of Israel. They held that it was lawful to give tribute to Caesar, all the taxes that he made. Of course, for tonight, for this one scripture, the one passage, we're really only talking about one tax, which makes it more interesting. On the other side of this argument were the Pharisees. They resented the tax. These zealous Jews viewed paying taxes as a great humiliation to them, which is probably just their arrogance in operation. They could cite a historical precedent for their position in the decree of King Artaxerxes in Ezra chapter 7, verses 21 and 23 through 24. "And I, even I, Artaxerxes, the king, issue a decree to all the treasures who are in the region beyond the river, that whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, may require of you, let it be done diligently. Whatever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it diligently be done for the house of the God of heaven. For why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and his sons?" Not exactly a pure motive, but it's a sufficient motive. Verse 24, "Also we inform you that it shall not be lawful to impose tax, tribute, or custom on any of the priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, Nethinim, or servants of this house of God." So what was the tribute that was in question? And it's important for us to understand that so that we can apply that to our experience. The tribute in Jesus' day was a poll tax of 1 denarius per person, which was a day's wage, that was assessed on the entire population, including the temple ministers. The publicans were responsible to collect the tax and transmit it to the Roman treasury. This tribute would be similar to an income tax today. Similar, not the same. Because this is just one of the taxes that they put on the populace. It was on the entire populace, but the Pharisees supposedly were objecting to it because of the law of King Artaxerxes, which was hundreds of years before that. So it didn't make any sense. There was no legal basis for that. Rome was now in charge. They had been in charge for a couple of hundred years, and they had no relation to the Persian government. So whatever the Persian government said or did, the Romans had already defeated the Greeks who defeated the Persians, and that law was null and void. So they didn't really have a legal base, and they didn't have a scriptural base. G. Campbell Morgan said, "Duty to Caesar exists and is conditioned in responsibility to God." So there's, again, that dual exercise of responsibility. So there was a challenge given to ultimate wisdom. It wasn't just a legal basis, it wasn't a religious basis, it wasn't a cultural basis. The ultimate wisdom is the true basis of our lives. In a cunningly devised scheme to trap Jesus by his own words, the Herodians and the Pharisees came to Jesus and asked him about the tax. Their wicked plot was exposed as recorded by Luke in chapter 20, verse 20. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous that they might seize on his words in order to deliver him to the power and authority of the governor. So these two different parties, they weren't really caring about the tax. They weren't caring about who was having to pay the tax. What they were caring about is how they could trap Jesus, because he was exposing their unrighteousness and the wickedness of their heart. So that's something that we have to see. Now, based on their secret goal, their secret agenda, which we can see now that there's a lot of people who have that, they were hoping that Jesus would tell them that the tax was not lawful. They assumed that he would want to do this because it would please all the Jews. Of course, they weren't looking at it from God's perspective, so they couldn't anticipate what his answer was going to be. They also knew that if he said it was a lawful tax, the Pharisees would be able to denounce him to the people as a traitor to his own country. All this. He was God in the flesh, and he knows us and our thoughts and our perspective and the way that we approach decisions. So we need to make sure that we are sensitive and that we are searching for that ultimate wisdom in our life as we live it. Now, the fact that neither the Herodians nor the Pharisees could condemn him for his answer indicates that he responded from a higher level of understanding. The debate over taxation can be resolved only by understanding and accepting God's perspective on money, which we'll get to in just a second. But we need to look at gratefulness again, its definition as a character quality versus complaining. Gratefulness is expressing sincere appreciation to the Lord and others for the ways they have benefited my life. When we start looking at the benefits that we've gotten from other people, even or significantly the government, then we will not be complaining about those things that we have to give up. Gratefulness is receiving all things from the sovereign hand of God and finding the benefits in each one. And we've talked about this last week also. So it's a matter of believing what God says about himself and about how he, throughout history, has dealt with and related to men. So if we believe that God is sovereign, then we have to accept the fact or admit the fact that sometimes we're not on board with that because of the way that we respond to what's happening to us. So that's something that we need to look at. James chapter 1, verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. So we know that all things that happen are at least allowed by God for our benefit. So we need to thank God for what we do have instead of complaining about what we don't have. It's too often we can be focusing on the wrong thing. When we focus on the benefits that God has given us, regardless of how few they are, then we're not going to be thinking about what God owes us, because that's the way that we think. If we fail to focus on God's purposes for money, we will tend to either hoard it or squander it. I don't hoard or squander, but I want to be responsible with it, and I try to be resourceful and thrifty. So I have a hard time with people who waste, even though it's a little bit of waste. Because sometimes they think, well, just because I'm wasting just a little, it's all right. Well, no, waste is waste. A little or a lot, it doesn't matter. It's still wrong. Now, their wicked plot was exposed as recorded by Luke. Luke chapter 20, verse 20. Or did I already read that? Well, let's look at what our view, we need to move on. How do we tend to view money? What is my view on money? Now, we tend to view our money as our possession. It's what I own. It's what I've earned. It's what belongs to me. So we assume that we have the right to decide how it will be spent. And so if we want to go buy something, we do that without considering what the Lord wants. We see it as a means to enjoy independence and to purchase the things we need or want. Now, I know that we need food. It just depends on the kind of food that you need. We see it as a means to, we believe that the more money we have, the more freedom we will have to make our own decisions. So that's what money does for us. I had a friend of mine one time. He was actually a massage therapist, and he was had a very high moral standard. He told me one time, he said, all money does, because he's had a lot and then he didn't, and he's had a little, all money does is give you options. That's really all it does. It gives you more options. And that's not what is the essence of the kingdom of God. We also tend to view money as a means of security for the future. There's a lot of people that I've worked through over the years who had lots of money, but they were worried about spending of it so that because in the future they might not have it. And it wasn't very much to do along, but they were really anxious about that. Now, we try to store up as much as we can since we do not know what will happen to us in the future. That's what exactly their attitude and perspective was. I don't know what's going to happen, so I want to save as much money as possible. Now, the result of this perspective is that we make money our God because we expect from money what only God can do and what He can give us, including happiness, security, freedom from fears, and peace of mind. Now, by building our lives, if we do that, if we build our lives around money, we reveal that we are guilty of the love of money, which is the root of all kinds of evil. And it's in 1 Timothy 6. But it brings with it grief, temptation, and disillusionment. You may have experienced this, you may have not. I know that I have. A further problem is that we never have enough money to make us feel secure. And the riches that we have, Proverbs 23, verse 5, addresses. Let's see. Do I have that written down? No, I don't. That riches make themselves wings that fly away as an eagle toward heaven. And that's where that illustration comes from when you see a dollar bill with wings on it. That's where it comes from, the book of Proverbs. Now, if we think we have enough, we become like the rich fool who has said to his soul, "Soul, you have much goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, and drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided?" Well, what is the Lord's view on money? God views all money as His possession, including all the money in our bank account. Now, I have a checkbook. Of course, my bank account has my name on it. And I have a checkbook and it has my name on it, but that doesn't mean that the money is mine, because it all belongs to God, and we're going to see why in just a minute. God created all true wealth and has given us an ability to acquire a certain amount of it. So He warns us not to say to ourselves in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 17 through 18, "Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant, which He swore to your fathers, as it is this day." So the Lord gives us the ability to gain wealth so that we can cooperate with what His promises are. God sees money as a trust that He gives to each individual, and He sees each receiver as a steward of what belongs to God. So everything that we have belongs to the Lord, and He wants us to use it for His purposes. Money is not to be hoarded or squandered, but wisely invested in order to bring increase and then return to the Lord in order to fulfill His purposes in the world. At the end of our lives, we're going to have to give account at the judgment seat of how we used His money. At that time, our bank balance will be brought back to zero, and all the rewards are going to come directly from the Lord for how we've used our money for what we've invested in. Now, we came to this world with nothing, and we will leave with nothing, as Job testifies in Job chapter 1, verse 21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, when we realize that God is the source of all wealth, it's not our cleverness, it's not our hard work, it's not our skill, it's not our knowledge or our wisdom, it's what God gives us. We can then enjoy being His channel to meet the needs of others. And I'd just like for you to recall, for those who've never been to our fellowship, you won't realize this, but I just want to say that we've made many appeals over a number of years to where someone has had a need and the fellowship has given to that need. And that's because the Lord has given to you first. We had our sister church in the Philippines have their roof blown off by a typhoon, and so the church donated thousands of dollars in order to replace that roof. And then they needed a water well, and we donated another thousands of dollars to that. And then there's been different other numerous missionary needs that we've donated to over the years. Then we've had all our activities and our outreaches that people donate a lot to. And then let's see, we take a benevolent offering every month after communion, and that is given to help people. And then finally, at the very last, the most recent, is that there was a young couple who's going to have a baby who needed a car, and I made an appeal for that. I took part of that, and there was a number of people who contributed to that, and so now they have a car that works because their other car was dying. So that's why we have wealth, so that the Lord can work through us to meet the needs of others with His wealth. And of course, we're going to be tested for faithfulness. Now, when the rich despise the poor, they are on the way to poverty and shame. When I was in Tyler, I don't know if I was working for the church or if I was just working at the church, but I had an old 67 Ford Fairlane four-door, and it was in bad shape. The paint was faded, and there was one of the fenders was all busted up. And so this guy, whom I barely knew from the church, he was probably younger than I was. He's 19, 20, maybe 22. Came up to me and said something about the car. And what I told him, I said if it was not for someone like me, people like you wouldn't have anything to feel good about. And that shut him up. So he had the wrong perspective about what was really important as far as wealth is concerned. All I was concerned about is that I had a car that transported me to where I needed to go, and I was able to take my family where they needed to go. He was wanting something fancy that looked good. And that's not the way God works. So what are God's purposes for money? In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17, we're given a significant list of people to honor. It says, first of all, and we talked about honor a couple of weeks ago, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. The word in this verse, the Greek word translated honor, means to prize, to fix a valuation upon, or to revere. By paying tithes and offerings and giving gifts, we honor the Lord and those who are served by the church. And I think that you can see that over a period of time in this fellowship. God wants us to be a channel of His provision for the needs of others. So when we get extra, it's not necessarily for us to enjoy more, but to be able to give more. We are to give to the poor and distribute in Romans chapter 12, verse 13, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. So we help people when they need it. God has designed the weekly tithe to teach us to fear Him. That's to remind us who this all belongs to, that our life belongs to Him, and then to meet the needs of others. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 22 through 23. You shall truly tithe all the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year. And you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses to make his name abide. The tithe of your grain and your new wine and your oil, of the firstborn of your herds and your flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. Now it's very significant in this verse that the tithe that they gave, they got to sit down and eat part of. So this just shows from the very beginning that when we give to the Lord, he intends it to benefit us also. That doesn't mean you should take your part out, but what I'm saying is that when you do give, you will be benefited by that. Now, where am I? In Paul's instruction to New Testament believers, he also addresses the issue of tithing. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. By paying taxes, we honor the king and all those who are benefited by his leadership. So in giving to the church, we benefit everyone who's being benefited by the church, and when we give to the government, we benefit everybody who the government serves. When Peter was approached by tax collectors and asked if Jesus paid the tribute, he immediately answered yes. Jesus then took Peter aside and explained that because he was the Lord, he was not subject to the tax. But he made another statement, Matthew chapter 17, verses 24 through 27. When they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, Does your teacher not pay the temple tax? He said yes, and when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers? Peter said, From strangers. Jesus said to him, Then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and for you. Now, this is a significant precedent for believers, for all believers. The Lord is more concerned about offending tax collectors than giving up the money needed to pay the tax. So, in other words, we're supposed to be a testimony of God's grace. The message is affirmed by Peter as well in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, or 16 actually, because we've read 17. Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors as to those who are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So our testimony proves that God is real. As free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God. Now, this was an amazing message, considering that Peter was requiring loyalty and support of the very government that later crucified him. And he not only crucified him, they crucified him upside down, which is probably worse. The Apostle Paul had the same message in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Notice that 3 times, let me go to this first. Taxes make sense when we realize that public officials are ministers of God appointed to carry out his work. Now, you may look around at the government, whether it's county, city, state, or federal, and say, well, they're really not carrying out God's work. They are accountable to God for that. That's not something, we can change it by the way we vote, but as far as them being accountable, they're accountable to God for that, and will someday answer for that. Now, 3 times in this passage, civil rulers are called ministers of God. So we have to accept that. That's what he says. Their function is to punish evildoers and to promote that which is good. As we honor and support them in ways that God teaches, we help them to do good to all those who are under their jurisdictions. And of course, as we see the misuses and the abuses and the discrimination and everything else that we experience, maybe you've experienced personally, that's a point where we have to pray and ask God to change the hearts of those who are over us. And if you feel the need to, you can campaign for someone else to be elected. But the bottom line is that we have to check ourselves and to make sure that we are grateful for what God has given us and how He's provided for us through the government authorities. And